There was a forest I used to go to with my friends sometimes. The local teens called it the Noble Hills Preserve Woods. And this was back in 2010, I'd say, since I was a senior in high school at the time. There was this one weekend that I went there with my friends. Let's call them John and Emily. It was a very spur of the moment kind of thing, and it was a late start. We were supposed to hang out at my house at first, but my mom said no to us chilling in my room. So that's when we got in John's car and went for a ride. It was freezing that night because it was January in New Jersey. I remember in John's car, the three of us were warm, given that we had the heat on. Our bodies were giving off heat, and we had some soft blankets for the back seat and sheets and stuff. So when John and Emily started making out in the front seat, separating themselves with one of the blankets for whatever reason, I felt awkward and said, just let's get out and go for a walk or just do anything else. So John drove us to the Noble Hills Preserve parking lot, and we started our hike through the woods. To be honest, I was kind of having a bad night all in all because my mind was racing over all this drama I had with another friend of mine, and it was just giving me anxiety, and I was forcing myself to act all cheerful around my friends, when in reality I was down in the dumps the whole time. When we got to our usual spot, we would go in this little clearing. It was actually a little bit of a steep decline to get down to. So when you were down there, you were completely enclosed by trees at all angles. We would sit around on the still cold grass and just talk for a while. Usually, but this time, we only heard the sound of footsteps crushing the leaves nearby, up one of the hills surrounding us, in a certain direction. We looked, and John started laughing, saying he saw a person up there, and he actually started screaming very loudly, as loud as he could, saying nonsense shit, like, "Do you want a piece of me?" I asked where he was seeing this person. He kept pointing, but I didn't even see him until he started laughing, telling me how blind I was. We all saw that person walking quietly in the opposite direction out of sight, and gradually the sound of their footsteps disappeared into the depths of the woods. Emily said we should scream hi to any random person we see, but I laughed and said that we actually just heard some kind of clown, and I imitated John's screaming, and honestly, it was so spot on that Emily and I were practically in tears laughing. This started some kind of playful screaming war between me and John, where we would see who could scream louder, as I was screaming at the top of my lungs. John started screaming too, but he wasn't like happy screaming, he was terrified screaming, and it didn't make sense at first until I turned to look at what he was screaming at. There were two tall, creepy looking men walking over the top of a hill into the open clearing that we were in, and John was screaming in reaction to it. They were both wearing gas masks and dark jeans and black sweaters. Neither of them wore hats, so we could see their long, messy hair sticking out the back of the masks. It honestly was a very surreal moment. But John's screaming run finally set in, and my adrenaline started up. The three of us ran uphill out from the clearing. The masked men stayed where they were standing. They didn't bother approaching us. We assumed they were high or on drugs or something. We ran in the direction of the car, all the while breathless from the adrenaline. I felt as though my heart was doing damage to my body by how fast it was beating. Eventually, when we thought we reached where the car was parked, we realized we cut the wrong way and got lost. None of us thought to bring our phones. We basically zigzagged back and forth from one trail onto another. Well, not really a trail. These were actual woods, but we knew this place well enough to know where the trails basically would have been if they weren't covered by snow. It was just so dark and hard to see. It didn't come off as a shock that we would get lost. We actually had to stop to take a breath. We had a group freakout session, basically trying to figure out the quickest way back to an actual trail. As we were catching our breaths, I heard footsteps crushing dead leaves somewhere in the near distance. I said, "Guys, be quiet." And I grabbed John and Emily stuck against me. We stayed quiet and still. I urged Emily not to scream, knowing she had a tendency to. I pointed at a tall, dark figure in the distance, walking very, very slowly. We crouched down and tried to creep away, eventually back in the direction we came. We continued walking in that direction until we were sure the footsteps we heard before couldn't be heard anymore, and I also checked behind us like 5 times until we finally found a trail and followed it to the parking lot. We were all so relieved. But now, here's the part that has stuck with me and still gives me nightmares. There were footsteps in the snow that were dropping from the side of the parking lot up to a trail, and it was the side of the parking lot that right up to the trail that we eventually just came from. We saw those same footsteps leading from the edge of the woods to my friend's car and then back into the woods. It was creepy and bizarre, even though I wouldn't say there's any way they could have even gotten the chance to plant anything in John's car. We still searched it. When we got in the car, I was thinking, should we report a sighting of 2 people who, for all I know, could have been serial killers? No, I never did, because we were 18 and dumb, drinking and smoking weed in the woods. We didn't want to risk getting into any trouble with the police over God knows what. So, long story short, we drove out of there and went home. Honestly, it took us all a while to go back there again, and it was at least a year before I decided to go back. It was one of those places where during the summer months you could not go there at night without seeing at least 2 other cars parked as well, filled with young adults doing probably the same things that we always used to do. No, we never had another encounter like that, though. Your support means a lot. Subscribe and like if you want us to keep sharing these stories. This happened to me when I was a kid. It was a cold winter night, and my parents were out. They had a nice dinner to go to with some friends, so they left me home alone. I didn't mind too much. I was used to that kind of thing, and I was a little older at the time, between 12 and 13. I was the oldest in my family, so my parents would start leaving me home alone sometimes. It was pretty easy for me. All I really had to do was not get into trouble by the time. Before this, my parents had left me home alone maybe 2 or 3 times, so I was kind of new to it, and whenever I got the chance, it seemed like I was ready to make it last a lifetime. But that was before this night. After my parents had left, I found myself to be bored after a few hours. But being bored was very common back then. All I had to do was play some video games, which I did. I played some games on my Xbox. Then I got off of that and went to the kitchen to find something to eat. The time at this point was 9 and so on. If I remembered right, I wanted to stay up late, really late, and take advantage of not having any adults around. When I was in the kitchen, I saw that we really didn't have any good food. I decided to have the next best thing, and I went to the pantry to grab some cereal. There was this cereal that I loved. I grabbed it and poured myself a bowl. Then I heard a loud noise at the front of the house, and I knew exactly what it was. The doorbell, it gave me a bit of a scare, even though I knew what the noise was. It was unexpected and made me jump. I was also confused as to who was ringing the doorbell. My first thought was my parents' Trace. I set the bowl down and started walking out of the kitchen. It took maybe 10 or 15 seconds. When I got out into the front hallway, I saw a man standing in the window next to our door. It took me by surprise. I was expecting it to be my parents, not some random guy. He looked pretty old, probably, like 60 or 70 at the time, and he was wearing all dark clothes. That's about all I can remember. I was not close enough to the door to see all that much. There were 2 small windows at the top of our doors at the time, which were rectangular shaped. Then there were larger windows, which were taller than they were wide, and they were located on both sides of the door. I should also mention they were very close to the actual door. I saw the man was looking in one of those windows. That was when I turned back around and walked away. I was walking back to the kitchen, but when I got there, I just kept going and headed to the back of the house. In no way was I going to answer the door for what appeared to be a stranger when I didn't have any parents home. But if it was my parents, I would have answered the door sooner. I just knew that they wouldn't have rung the doorbell. I made it all the way to the other end of the house, which had my room and some other things. I returned to my room and sat on the bed. I had a laptop there and I got on it, not to play games or anything like that, like I normally would have. I just sat on it and thought that the man at our door, who I assumed was a person trying to sell something or maybe looking for directions, was now distracting me from everything. Then I heard a noise. It was the noise like a window being opened. I knew it wasn't the windows in my room, but it had to have come from somewhere close by, possibly. In the next room, I stood up and walked out. That led me into a hallway, which was open at the end, that led into another room. Off a ways, I heard another noise this time. It was footsteps. Whoever was in the room was now walking, which confirmed that the noise I heard before was a window being opened. I studied the hallway and then saw a dark figure walk out from the other room and into the hallway on the other side. I was horrified. Who was this guy? I quickly went back in my room and got into the closet as fast as I could. Then I closed the door shut. I waited for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, all the while hoping the man wouldn't come in, and this was a very clear attack on our home. The man was, in fact, a burglar. Maybe he thought that nobody was home or something, and that would be a reasonable thought. I said to myself the doorbell was rung to check for that, and anybody who was home would have come to the door by now. But moments later, I heard him into my room. This did not make sense to me. Why would a burglar be headed to my room if he thought nobody was home? I don't think he could have heard me walking to my room on the other side of the house from the front door. So how did he know I was in here? The only explanation was that he saw me somehow. When I went out of the kitchen, his eyes were looking at me when I turned and went the other way, and that was how he knew I would remember this for the rest of my life. But there was nothing I could do now. I heard him walking around for a bit, and after shortly, it became clear he knew exactly where I was. His steps got closer and closer until he was right outside of my closet and phone. Of course, I had to leave it in the kitchen, so I couldn't even call the police, even if I had my phone, though. I'm not sure if I would have called, but I was really regretting it. I wasn't thinking straight at all that night. The man opened the closet door, and there I was standing right in front of him. He was wearing a ski mask, a black hoodie, and all black pair of pants. I only saw him for a brief moment, because as soon as he opened the door, I punched him in the gut as hard as I could and ran away. Not before I heard him let out an "awoo," and I was out of there, ran out of my room into the hallway and towards the other room. I made it into a side room. To the left, the man followed me, but I was a few steps ahead from the room. I was able to get out of a window and get outside when I did. There was snow on the ground, and I ran to the front of the house. I didn't see the man, and he did not follow me outside. Instead, when I got to the front, I ran to a neighbor's house that knew me very well. When I got there, I rang the bell and they let me in. I was out of breath. So for the next few minutes, I tried to explain to the neighbors what had just happened while catching my breath. Then they called the police. The police arrived within just a few minutes, and one of the neighbor guys went to my house. Before them, the burglar was nowhere to be found. He had gotten away. I'm not sure if he got away with anything or if he just ran for it after I punched him in the stomach. There wasn't much doubt, however, that it was the man who had rung the doorbell earlier as well. None of the neighbors had seen him. I felt as though the whole thing was somehow my fault. If I had only answered the door, it would have driven him away from burglarizing the house. At the very least, I knew I should have called 911 when all of this was happening. But I was just a kid, and sometimes in crazy situations, you don't make the correct decisions. I was just glad that I was okay. After that, my parents were called and they came back home. Police never did find the man, or at least to my knowledge, and nothing like that has happened to us ever since. A few years back, my friend David and I used to go to the gym together. It was pretty nice having a gym buddy, and it made working out more enjoyable for the both of us. At the time, David and I had similar schedules. We both worked in the afternoons and evenings and had weekday mornings off. We would work out approximately 3 times per week in the city where we lived. But every now and then we would go to a little town in the next town. Over there was a small gym there and also a small pizza place that we really liked. Every couple of weeks, we would go and work out there, then get pizza afterward and kind of make it a fun day. Usually I would drive, and this was in the wintertime. It was very cold, and sometimes that made walking from my car to the gym difficult. We would usually spend 2 or so hours inside. It would be worth it though, because the pizza afterward was delicious. One time I picked David up to work out at that gym. We were actually planning our routine and talking about it. On the way there, some of this stuff we would do outside. We arrived and I parked my car into the parking lot of the strip mall area. There were maybe 5 or 6 other cars there besides ours. We got out and went inside to start working out. Like I said, most of our workouts would last about 2 hours. When I was doing one of my last exercises, I noticed an older man who looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He was just sort of walking around the gym, not really doing much weightlifting or anything like that. He seemed a little bit out of place, in my opinion. The gym has all different types of people, though, so I didn't think that much of it. Eventually, we finished up inside. I remember it was still light outside, but the sun was starting to set. David and I went outside to run sprints. The gym was sort of in a strip mall. There was more businesses next door. Then down on the far end was a closed down restaurant with a parking lot that was empty. That's where we ran sprints at. The parking lot was just empty and frozen. It was a good 100-yard dash or so distance to run. It was extremely cold outside. I remember being all bundled up in winter gear. It was about 10 degrees out within a couple of minutes of us being out. There was snowflakes coming down now as well. I was running my last sprint when I saw the old guy from inside walking in our direction from the gym. Now I know why I noticed him inside. He just seemed to walk around the gym from one side to the other, oftentimes making loops. He just did the same thing in the parking lot, then just kept going on. It really wasn't out of the ordinary, so I was stretching after running my sprints when my friend David noticed something in the snow about 20 or so yards away from the two of us. It didn't look like much, and there was barely any snow on the ground. But David went over to it just to see what it was. At that point, the object was covered up. We never would have noticed if the snowflakes hadn't just landed on it. David picked it up. It was a short little bat, just about the size of a pen. It seemed to be made of solid steel, though there was some black wrap that was on the bottom for a grip. I took a look at it, and it seemed to be a weapon of some kind, but we didn't know for sure. We were wondering what it was doing in the snow in the empty far area of the parking lot. We looked around, and all that we saw was the old man, a long ways away now, still wandering around. We decided to get out of there. We made our way back to my car and drove to get pizza at the pizza restaurant. But on the way there, it just sort of popped into my head. What if that old man had been wearing that and had it drop off unexpectedly? I was imagining how, when we ran sprints, he had gone out into the parking lot and started walking in our direction, then turned around as if he had planned on heading back. At that point, he had just remembered something and was on his way to retrieve it, or did he have bad intentions? I informed David of what I thought. He agreed that there was a good chance that that's what happened. We had no proof, but just to be on the safe side, we decided to give what we found to the police. We would go to the police station after dinner. We were both hungry after working out and found a table at the pizza place. David put the object in his pocket to keep it concealed. Even though we were in a very small, safe town, David and I ordered a large cheese pizza to split. Then we sat down at a table in the back. I remember there was a single TV in the restaurant that was playing a sports game of some kind. Overall, it wasn't very busy. There was nobody sitting near us or in the back half of the restaurant besides us, but there were quite a few people in the front half of it. A little while later, I noticed that same older man from the gym again. He was walking outside and stopped suddenly near the pizza place. Then, a minute or two later, I saw him come inside. That was really weird. I had a strong feeling that this guy was up to no good. David and I talked to each other about how sketchy the man was. He was in the front of the restaurant. Now I'm not sure what he was doing when our pizza came. A little while later, I stood up and walked towards the front to get some napkins. When I did, I passed by the man and noticed that he was watching me. When I got back to the table, he had gone yet again. I wasn't sure where, but it appeared he might have left a short time after that. I went up to the counter to get a refill. The man appeared from out of nowhere and started walking towards our table in the back when I got my drink, and then turned around again. I saw him walking away from our table. That was strange when I went over. David said that the guy did a slow walk by of us, but he didn't say anything. This whole thing was so creepy. We spent quite a bit of time inside of that pizza restaurant that, if I'm being honest, I wasn't all that crazy about the pizza. There was better choices elsewhere. Eventually we left, and after we had finished eating, I drove David to the police station of the small town, which was not very far away. I'm not sure if it was a police station or a sheriff's office. It was a very small place. David gave them the object. Then, when questioned, we realized just how lucky we had gotten 4 nights. The steel bat-like thing was actually a Japanese police kosh. It's used by Japanese police officers over there. It turns out it was the same weapon used by a man who was charged with murder in a nearby town. Somehow the police hadn't caught the guy yet. He fled, and the town was a little ways away from where we were. It was a bit of a mystery just why the man was there when the case was closed. The old man was sentenced to life in prison. I was just glad that I didn't become one of his victims.